Hey, everybody, welcome to the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley. And every week we bring you stories of people making a difference in the lives of others locally, globally, and digitally. We're part of Rotary International, 1.4 million Rotarians and Rotaractors and 36,000 plus clubs around the world. And we, in our club, the E Club of Silicon Valley, have a specific interest in innovation, entrepreneurship, and education. And the program you're going to get today is one of those that kind of touches on all three. A slightly different format. You just watched a video about Zach's path and the Tidelines Institute and the start of it. And so what I will have you do if you are watching this recording and you're like, wait, what video? If you are on our Rotary page, then just scroll up a bit. It's the embed that's right above this one. If you are on our YouTube page, then look down in the description and you can watch that video first and then come back to this, because that is absolutely the right way to encounter this story. So with that explained, let me introduce our speaker. You already learned about him through the video, but this is a PhD from Stanford who essentially has a heart to make a difference with the planet. And he has taken a path that is one that I think is really kind of an exciting model for thinking about how to create change. And wherever you are on the political spectrum, I think you will find this a compelling argument for how to improve the lives of people in our communities near and far. With that, I'd like to hand it over to our speaker, Zach Brown. Zach, thank you so much for giving time to talk to the Rotary Club of Silicon Valley, and tell us more about the work you're doing.
Thank you very much, Rushton, and to all the Rotarians here. It's an honor to be here. I'm a big believer in the Rotary Club's service-oriented mission. It really fits with what Tidelines Institute is trying to do. So, and thank you also for taking time out of your lives, taking an interest in the climate crisis and getting involved, because we don't have a lot of time to mess around. It's a very serious challenge and one where we need all hands on deck. My name is Zach Brown. As Rushton said, I'm a climate educator, scientist, and activist. And I'm beaming into you today from a 400-person town in remote Alaska with no roads to it. And because of that, I'm going to, for the duration of this slideshow, I'm just going to shut down my video just to make sure we have plenty of bandwidth, and then we will I'll see you again as soon as we get to the Q&A. So now you will have seen kind of a solo journey that began in that video, but about the time that that video was made, I met the lovely Laura Marcus, who subsequently became my wife, moved to Alaska, and this May we're going to have our first child. And back when the pandemic canceled all of our student courses in 2020, we used that vacuum to merge our two nonprofits into one. Laura had founded her own educational nonprofit. That's how we met. We were introduced by a fellow donor, and we merged our two together, and thus Tidelines Institute was born. So our work at Tidelines is really based around these three pillars of research, sustainability, and education. And here's the first pillar of ecological research. We value science as one key way of understanding the natural world. So we get our students out there in the field to learn in this giant living laboratory that surrounds us. Here we have Stanford student Dylan Anslow taking stream measurements, getting down and dirty, poking at grizzly bear scat, and then just an image of measuring yellow cedar trees that are dying off due to climate change, actually. And secondly, we have this pillar of sustainability. It's a word that's tossed around an awful lot today. We want our students at Tidelines Institute to redefine it by living it firsthand. So Tidelines Institute is completely off-grid. There's no grids for 100 miles. Our twin campuses are powered by microhydroelectric and solar power. We harvest wild berries, hunt, fish. There's an expansive garden on the campuses. That's one of the most profound lessons that Tidelines Institute can teach, that food doesn't just come from the supermarket, power doesn't just come from the wall, water doesn't just come from the tap. So Here's some student group working in our garden, catching rockfish from kayaks. This summer's student, Eli, filleting his first salmon. Just look at that thrill on his face and that gorgeous red fillet. I mean, this is this is an experience that students aren't getting anywhere else that I'm aware of, certainly not at Stanford. And here I am bringing a deer out of the alpine so that our students could have the incredible experience of skinning and butchering something that's, I think, deeply human, but that our students aren't getting anywhere else inside the walls and learning from screens. Here we have Dartmouth College engineering students helping us install solar on our workshop roof, giving them real practical field experience in sort of the renewable energy revolution. The most important of the three pillars, though, is experiential education. What does this mean? It means we're not learning from inside the walls of the classroom or academia. We're not learning from computer screens. There's nothing passive about it. Experiential learning means learning by doing, learning by exploring, learning by getting our hands dirty. So students paddling through the fjords of the Indian Islands. Here we are looking at a culturally modified tree. There is a mountain of research now showing that this form of learning is so much more impactful, more transformative, and more lasting than sort of traditional classroom-based. And it's so much more fun. I mean, I could have gone into the academic world and taught in a classroom, but this is our classroom. So lucky to be involved in this, to be able to do it where we do it. So when we connect students to the natural world in these three ways, our hope, our theory of change, is that they will take these experiences into lives and careers of environmental leadership. To make them effective leaders, we have to give our students real tools for change making. So what are those tools? Well, a very important paper came out in the journal Science a few years ago by Elise Amel and her colleagues. They're environmental psychologists, which I think is super cool. And what they imagined was an individual who's looking to do their part to help change the world, like many of us on this watching this video. But it's more interesting and more fun to be specific rather than general. So I'm going to pick on our very own Rushton Hurley as an example. So let's say that one thing that Rushton likes to do to make a difference is ride his bike rather than drive. Okay, so he's got the bicycle there. Now, Amel and colleagues define the various spheres of influence that a person can have. The first is the private and personal. Okay, so this is our classic reduce, reuse, recycle level of action. For Rushton, it means riding his bike to work, and that's great. But maybe he wants to think a little bigger. He might look to the next circle and encourage his friends and neighbors to also ride their bikes. You know, he'll help them tune their bikes up, oil their chain, get their tires pumped up, get a bike light and helmet to keep it safe. Now 10 people are riding instead of one. That might not be enough for Rushton. He might move to the next level and actually start a community organization dedicated to bike riding. He starts up a bike share program with community education about the benefits of bike riding for your health and for the environment. Okay, now there's 100 people riding their bikes. Now, if that wasn't enough, Rushton decides to run for Congress on the bicycle platform. And when he wins, he's going to introduce legislation that everyone in the US has to ride bikes. Cars are illegal. So good luck getting that legislation passed, Rushton. But eventually, if Rushton does enough work spreading the bicycle gospel, we reach the biggest sphere of influence, which is cultural. This is when we don't even need a law on the books forcing us to ride bikes, because of course we're going to ride bikes. That's our culture. You know, if you don't ride a bike, you're not part of our tribe and you can leave. We're bicycle people. The most revealing thing about this diagram is that Elise Amel and her colleagues put an axis on it. Notice that the axis goes from smallest impact at the top to largest impact at the bottom. What it shows is that personal action is the smallest level of impact we can have. It's not that composting and changing light bulbs are bad things. It's just that they're so clearly not getting us where we need to be. And you know who understands this diagram better than anyone? The fossil fuel industry. See, The fossil fuel industry doesn't want us to make the needed changes in our society and our energy system because they stand to lose trillions of dollars in profits if we move full scale to renewable energy. They have been working to keep the system as it is so that they can keep selling us fossil fuels, which is why they've been blocking climate action since before I was born. When they get together in their boardrooms, I guarantee you they're not talking about reusable grocery bags or any other kind of individual action. They're operating where the real power is. They're operating at the public level by buying politicians with massive campaign donations, lobbying the federal government to the tune of $1 million a day, fueling voter suppression efforts. And they're also operating at the cultural level by discrediting climate science, by advertising so that we think that to be a man, you have to drive a V8 350 truck that gets 4 miles to the gallon, and by greenwashing their own image to create a culture where we believe they're helping to fix the problem, when in fact they're doing precisely the opposite. The fossil fuel industry wants us to believe that climate change is our fault and that the only way to fix it is to fix ourselves. Because as long as we believe that, we'll be stuck up here trying to change as individuals without changing the system. And they can keep right on raking in record profits. I'm not just speculating that that's what the fossil fuel industry wants us to think. They've spent millions of dollars to convince us to blame ourselves. You want me to really blow your mind? The whole concept of the carbon footprint is a fossil fuel industry invention conjured up by BP in 2005 in a $100 million ad campaign. This is what that ad campaign looked like. Look at how they shift the blame. Your mark on the world. CO2 emitted due to your daily activities. Meanwhile, they're rebranding themselves as Beyond Petroleum, even though they continue to buy politicians with and lobby the government and fight tooth and nail against policies to reduce our systemic addiction to fossil fuels. Now, and look how they complete it. It's a start. Well, they know that it's only a start, that if we buy into this, it will make us totally ineffective at solving this crisis because we'll be working at the smallest sphere of influence. So this is where it's at. Mary Haglar is an amazing young woman of color, one of our best environmental writers. We've been talking about recycling and other personal actions for 3 decades, and in that time, carbon emissions have skyrocketed. It's time to realize it doesn't work. We have to change the system, pulling it up by its very roots of injustice, inequality, and unchecked corporate power. Bill McKibben is one of our greatest climate writers and activists. He gets this question all the time. He gives a simple answer. Become less of an individual. Join the movement for climate justice. That's where the power is. So what does that look like? Well, it ain't about reusable shopping bags. I don't have time to treat these with any depth today, but some of the tools the climate movement is using to make real change include divestment. Divestment means moving your investments out of fossil fuels and reinvesting them elsewhere, maybe investing them in renewable energy. This is a mass movement. Funds and organizations valued in excess of $40 trillion, that's trillion with a T, have already committed to divestment. Related to divestment is pressuring the big banks, fund managers, and insurance agencies to stop lending billions of dollars to fossil fuel expansion, new pipelines and coal mines that we don't need. Stop the Money Pipeline has particularly targeted Chase Bank, which has lent hundreds of billions of dollars to the fossil fuel industry in just the few years since the Paris Agreement was signed. This is something you can do yourself. A recent study by Bank Forward shows that if you have just $125,000 sitting in any of the big banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, Citi, that money is doing more damage to the climate than all your other activities combined because the bank is lending it out to build pipelines. If we demand better from our banks, that's a huge lever for change. How else are people confronting the fossil fuel industry? Literally standing in the way. And increasingly, these protesters are winning David versus Goliath battles. As just one example of hundreds I could cite of the beautiful power of protest, here are the kayaktivists in the port of Seattle blockading the Polar Pioneer from heading up to the Arctic. And I've done my time protesting against Shell's plans to drill in the Arctic, a fragile and gorgeous place that I love. We scientists are some of the only people to ever go there. If we don't defend it, who will? But our biggest lever for making change is political mobilization to elect climate champions instead of climate deniers in all levels of government, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, from local to national. Here I'm showing the Sunrise Movement youth organizers that were occupying Nancy Pelosi's office to push climate action. And it worked, because guess what? If we elect climate champions, we get climate action. It ain't rocket science. So this past year, with climate champions in control of the presidency, Senate, and House, we got the Inflation Reduction Act, which is America's first climate legislation ever after over 30 years of working for it. So this is a very exciting time to be joining the movement because it has real tailwinds. I just want to close by encouraging all of you to join the climate movement, to become less of an individual. And I will help any way that I possibly can. So thank you very much.
All right, Zach, thank you very much for the presentation. All right, let's go ahead and de-share, and I'll introduce the folks that we've got like on the recording as well. Chris and Aggie, feel free to unmute your cameras there. We got Chris, a Canadian and an American, as of last few days. Congratulations on that. Aggie, a longtime Rotarian and health advocate. Good to see you as well. And my name is Rushton Hurley. It is good that you are joining us. I will start the questions. Chris and Aggie, you are very welcome to let me know in the chat if you have a question ready to go, and we'll shift over to you. If you type the question into the chat, I'll read it for you. But that's just how we handle these things. All right. Now, Zach, man, you've brought up a lot of interesting pieces to this one, and I want to explore this in a couple of different ways. One of the things that I feel like I have seen accelerate in the last year is the movement towards having pressure. Actually, I guess it would be pressuring insurance companies not to insure projects related to fossil fuel extraction, right? Now, that arguably has moved more companies off of their fossil fuel projects than most other approaches. But there are elements of your presentation that suggest that might be overplayed. Do you want to speak to that a bit? I tend to think that companies react very specifically to financial issues, whether you are pressuring them about the environment or anything else. That the bottom line is the bottom line.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, Russian. And that is a key part of that coalition of environmental, climate, and indigenous groups called Stop the Money Pipeline that I mentioned, is pressuring the banks and the fund managers, but also pressuring the insurance companies, as you pointed out, because no pipeline or coal-fired power plant or fossil gas export terminal can be built without insurance. And so the insurance companies are a big part of what's underwriting the expansion of the fossil fuel enterprise. And the science tells us very clearly that we need to not be expanding the fossil fuel enterprise. One of the bombs that's kind of lobbed back at activists who are pressuring this is, well, we can't cut off fossil fuels overnight. Our society runs on them, and that's absolutely true. And climate advocates and people with Stop the Money Pipeline are not advocating to shut down to cut off the supply of fossil fuels overnight. What we're saying is we have to stop expanding, but the fossil fuel industry can only make money and survive through expansion. And so it doesn't like the science, and it ignores the science, and ensures that they will continue to grow. But yes, to your point, the insurers are a big lever for change, because without them, the fossil fuel industry can't do what it does.
All right. So follow-up question through the chat coming from Chris on this one. How can an individual help influence the media? So I'm very much in Chris's camp about the stories and how the stories are told really determine the path for any particular movement. Influence the media to present or cover climate change solutions?
Yeah, that is such a great question. And actually, I would be remiss not to talk about the role of media in here, which is huge. So I think there's a couple of things, and I would point you to some experts in this field, such as Bill McKibben and Emily Atkin, who are writers, journalists, and have a lot more background than I do here. I don't know about the best place for an individual to get involved necessarily, but I know what generally needs to happen. We do need strong controls on social media and the spread of disinformation. And there's a very clear example that just went down with kind of the debacle at Twitter after Elon Musk's takeover. He removed tons of personnel. He removed the controls, and Twitter is now just awash in climate disinformation. Not just the greenwashing from fossil fuel companies, but old school climate change denial. People all over saying, climate change doesn't exist. It's a hoax. That stuff was pretty much on the outs within recent years, but it's back because Twitter no longer has any regulation on it. So we do need strong efforts to combat disinformation. Misleading information is much more difficult to combat. Misleading information such as the fossil fuel industry trying to convince us that they're going green when maybe that's 1% of their annual budget, and the rest is going towards more new pipelines and coal plants. So there's misleading information that has a slight, you can make the argument that it's true, but what it's doing is creating the impression that they're the good guys. And that's very difficult to combat. Then there's the mainstream media, which has a big role in this. For a long time, the mainstream media basically didn't cover, in the early 2000s or 2010s, for a lot, the mainstream media just didn't cover the climate crisis because it was controversial, because it wasn't getting the viewership, and without the viewership, then you can't sell people's attention to advertisers online, etc. And I think that it can be, that has turned somewhat. It is being covered a lot more in the media over recent years, though I would argue still not enough, considering it's the greatest threat to face humanity. But that journalists can be telling this story a lot better. When you just have a story that says, well, a climate change caused heat wave and flooding killed thousands of people, that's a depressing story, and nobody really wants to read about that. So fair enough. But if you can point out some of the true and dramatic elements of this story, the drama isn't, is climate change happening or is it not happening? That's a false drama that was created by climate change denialists. The drama is, we have a bunch of people who are trying to, and corporations who are trying to stop us from making progress on this, versus a bunch of people who are trying to create action and move us towards climate solutions. That is an intense drama that's playing out right now, from the halls of Congress, where climate denying politicians are at war with climate champion politicians, to your backyard, where they're trying to put in a solar field, and the fossil fuel industry has a front group in there ginning up local opposition to that project. This is happening all over the United States right now, and the media isn't covering it. So it's so the media really has a lot of work to do to get its act together to tell people the real story.
All right, so we'll do one more question before we finish the recording. Although, as longtime watchers of our programs know, by participating in the recording, we get to keep talking to these people that we connect with, which is really fun. And sometimes that includes all kinds of good questions that may have been a little bit acerbic, had we started with them. All good though. So Aggie asks a little bit about your passion for and commitment to this cause. We all saw the video coming into it. We have that sense of your story, but is there something that for you is the personal reason to keep doing what you're doing? So we understand the threat. We understand the issues related to the environment. But on a personal level, you've devoted your life to this. What is it now looking forward that gives you kind of hope that this is time well spent?
It revs my engine working with students and young people who are fired up to make change. And I see this fire in their eyes. And it's, it's one thing to talk about the tools for making progress and the various entities that are trying to block us from doing that. And it's, but I, in my work, get to marry that with watching their eyes light up as we pull a halibut onto the boat. I mean, it's just, it's just incredible. And I think that the synthesis of that deep sense of how spectacular the world still is and how much beauty we have left to fight for in our in the natural world that surrounds us and in our communities. I think that marrying that with real tools for change making, what is it that the climate movement is doing, I think is powerful. And I've seen not just kind of in individual students' eyes, the glint, the fire, the passion, but also I've seen that begin to transform on a societal level. This year's climate legislation is one example of that. That would not have been possible had it not been for the Sunrise Movement and many young activists who helped get climate champions into Congress to push that legislation forward. And I think we're seeing. I think we're in the middle of a major inflection point on renewable energy, and on just on a growing recognition that we need a new relationship with the world that's not based on corporate profits, but that's based on the well-being of people and the environment that we depend on. I'm very excited.
Well, that is a beautiful summative finish to that. I'll finish the recording by essentially reminding everybody that if you are a Rotarian from another club watching this recording, and you are on our Rotary page, our meeting page, then by scrolling down a little bit, you can fill out an attendance form, which will generate a note that you can pass along to your club secretary to make up a miss, if that's something you're looking to do. And a little farther down, feel free to share your thoughts on what you encountered in this program and in the rest of our meeting. This is an opportunity for us to share ideas with each other and to see where we agree and disagree and where there are possibilities for moving forward in all sorts of great ways. So with that, we thank you very much for taking part, and we will see you next week.